So should you buy a 5th generation 4Runner? This 4Runner basically has been the same generation since 2010. Few tweaks visually, some option changes, some color changes, but mechanically it has been exactly the same with some minor tweaks here and there. This particular one is a 2023 model TRD Pro, and rumor has it that this might just be the last year of the 5th generation and making way for the 6th generation. So in this video, we're gonna share what makes this truck so popular and why it is so good to the eyes of some and why is it not good in the eyes of others. We're gonna talk about some mechanical specifications, some things that changed throughout the years of the 4Runner, arriving at the latest and the greatest, the TRD Pro in 2023, right after this. Let's start by looking at the engine. And there is something to be said about this engine. This is the 1GR FE. This is the second iteration of the 1GR FE. And when this engine came out in 2010, in this and in the FJ Cruiser equally, it was already old school, back in 2010. Folks, this engine does not have direct injection, does not have turbos, does not have really complicated engine controls, complicated electronics. It has dual VVTi. That was groundbreaking for this engine back in 2005 though, not really 2010, let alone 2023. And this is where the beating heart of the 4Runner starts. See, in the automotive business, it seems like there is a race to keep up with emission standards, and all the car companies are going smaller engines to lower their emissions than tailpipe, not really just for gas mileage, for emissions. The 4Runner team just completely did not get that memo, or they got it and just decided, we don't need it. We'll just keep going with the old school stuff. What makes this engine great is that this is a GR series engine. This engine in the 3.5 variation debuted in the 2005 Toyota Avalon, and then it basically spread like wildfire to the entire lineup of Toyota with V6, and then slowly started going away until now it's almost gone. The Highlander lost his V6, the RX lost his V6, and now we still have this, for lack of a better word, dinosaur here. Because this is not even the latest version of the V6, this is the old school version of the V6. See, car buyers look at this engine and they say a few things usually. Oh, it's Toyota, it's reliable. But within the Toyota family, there are engines that are on the better side and there are engines that are on the lower on the reliability front. Most of them are decent, some of them not so much, but the majority of them are good. This one, however, in my opinion, sits at the top. I don't think in my entire long career working on Toyotas as a Toyota Master Diagnostic Technician and now owning my own shop working exclusively on Toyota and Lexus, I don't think I have ever been inside one of these. That is a statement to be said, and it's a factual one. I have been inside every single Toyota engine, all the way back to the early 2000s until now, to the newest engine, the A25A, for example. I have been inside of that already, tore one apart, multiple actually. This engine, however, I have never tore a 4Runner engine apart, and that is a statement. This is a very good engine, and it's not perfect. Nothing is perfect. This engine does have its downfalls. One of them is, it's not exactly on the powerful side. And that is intentional. This engine is conservative on every level. The maintenance is simple, repairs are simple, it is very small, it's compact, and you look at this, it looks super compressed and tight, but it's actually not. Once you start removing covers, you notice there's a lot of space. And the other thing is, this engine is on the border of simply being illegal to be put in cars. And in an attempt to keep this engine going, Toyota did one update and one update only to this engine. Not two, not three, one only. In a mid-year refresh of the 5th generation, right around 2014, they added secondary air injection. And usually when people hear secondary air injection, that equals all kinds of problems. Basically, every single model in the world that has had secondary injection, or at least 99% of them, have had some sort of issues at some point, except the 4Runner. The biggest issue you're going to have with this system is if you live in the Rust Belt and this car is 10 years old, you're potentially going to break a bolt or two if you have to remove them, which you do have to remove majority of the secondary air injection system to do spark plugs. That's really the only thing. But if you do not disturb it, it'll be here longer than you and I will be on this planet. This is a testimony to this truck. If you're looking for a fast truck, this engine will disappoint you. If you're looking for the quietest, smoothest truck, this engine will disappoint you because one of its other downsides is it is loud. It's clattery. Many people complain about its loudness when it's cold, but that is by nature. Let's take a listen to how this engine sounds like. Folks, this sound is normal, and many people will think this engine is ready to blow up or it's poorly made and whatnot. This is how this engine sounds like, and it's great. This is truly a good engine. I don't think any of its minor common problems remain in 2023, and this is the beauty of it. Potentially in the lifetime of 300,000 miles, you might put a water pump, maybe, and that's about it. I don't remember anything going wrong with these engines. The very older ones, they might have a front timing cover leak, but the newer ones, right around 2014, nothing. Absolutely nothing. Nothing caught on as a common problem with this engine. Perhaps a water pump, that's about it. But there is something else that is also a testimony to this powertrain, the A750 5-speed automatic transmission. I mean, this transmission, when it came out, it was on the old school side. This transmission is, for lack of a better word, bulletproof. There is very, very little problems with these transmissions, and usually they're caused by lack of maintenance, not really the transmission itself. And many people will say, well, 5 speeds is too low, we need more speeds and more. Do we really? Because this transmission is probably the smoothest shifting transmission you will ever find in any car, simply because it's well designed and it is in a car suited for it. Very simple transmission inside. There is not really a lot of technology. Yes, it is electronically activated and whatnot, but it's very, very simple. And the fluid, and many people complain about that, even though that is an old school debate. This does not have a dipstick. This has a very simple, even this is simple, dipstickless or sealed transmission service. You have 2 plugs, not 1, 2 plugs. This is the drain plug, and this is to check the transmission fluid level. Very, very simple setup. This transmission is so simple, construction-wise, that it truly matches the kind of the whole old schoolness of this truck. And then made it to that transmission in the 4-wheel drive models is the transfer case. And this transfer case, you notice, is missing the actuator, because this model is a TRD Pro. It has a manual shifting transfer case. But in the models that has the switch, you will find an actuator here that basically does what the shifter does. It just turns it and it shifts it into 4-wheel drive, 4-low, and whatnot. And from this transfer case, we have 2 output shafts. One of them goes to the rear differential. We're going to talk about that in a minute. And then the other one, the front one, goes to the front differential. You can get a slight shot of the front differential here. This is not a solid axle. You notice the differential is here, and then you have CV axles coming out of it. This design, we're going to talk about a little bit in the video, but this is not the most robust design in the planet. But even here, the 4Runner has a few things. This is cast iron, the differential material. It is cast iron, not aluminum. because you need something strong here. And here it is, a giant cast iron differential. Folks, I've removed a few of these differentials in my lifetime. They're extremely, extremely heavy. Now this 4Runner has the Fox shocks. You can see them right here. Because it is a TRD Pro model, that's really the only difference with the TRD Pro model. The shocks are different. They have these Fox shocks that we're going to talk about the trims in a little bit in the video. Not my favorite trim in the world, but the standard one will just have regular shocks. But there is a model that is the TRD Sport. That model absolutely makes no sense, by the way. And then the Limited has X3 suspension. Basically links this wheel, the left front wheel, to the right rear wheel, and the right front wheel to the left rear wheel. Basically making an X. That's what the X3 is. That system is also not good. Kind of problematic in the early years, leaks, and you gotta, very expensive, you gotta replace everything because it has a center shocks in between the two shocks, so it has a third shock. Not the best design in the world, really not something you want to look forward to. The standard shocks are great, the Fox shocks are okay, but we'll talk about the trims in a little bit. Going back, and this is where the giant solid axle is. I mean, this thing, I don't want to know if I don't call it pleasure or displeasure of replacing one of these housings. It was bent in an accident. This thing is so heavy, so bulky, and it's huge, and really well made. The truth has to be said. Cast iron differential, again, no aluminum stuff here. This is a locking rear differential, so you got the actuator on it. The rear suspension is super basic. Yes, it is coil spring, not leaf spring, but it has these arms that locate the rear differential in place. Very simple suspension, and the last time I remember having to do anything with this rear suspension is accident damage. The car was hit so hard, it actually bent the whole beam. But otherwise, you're not going to do anything here. Here's that Fox shock again in the back with the reservoir on the side. It is a pretty cool looking shock, but in my opinion, it is not all that worth it. And of course, the 4Runner has the spare tire underneath it with a little chain that if you drive close to a drive-through, like next to a wall, and you brake hard, you will hear this rattling. I don't know what they were thinking with this. Perhaps you're going to lock it here so people won't steal your spare tire, except they can always cut this chain and take it. That was a thing of the past. Now we turned over to catalytic converters, but there was a time where spare tire theft was a thing. And one thing about the TRD Pro model, which I actually do not like, the exhaust is actually upgraded. That is one of the other upgrades other than the shocks, and the truck's slightly lifted so it has different springs. The exhaust is a TRD exhaust. It is a humming exhaust. It's loud. Not my favorite exhaust in the world, but in case you guys are wondering, this is the TRD Pro exhaust. You notice this muffler is different and everything else is different, but otherwise, from here on forward, everything is exactly the same in all the trims. And this is an accessory that you can buy for the other ones, so hardly exclusive for the TRD Pro. So throughout the life of the 4Runner, there has been very few changes, not only on the mechanical side, but even on the cosmetics. I mean, if you look at this has basically been the same since 2014. Nothing have changed, exception of maybe one little thing, and that is 360 camera. That was an option that come much, much later, and even that is a camera from the 80s. It is not a very good camera, and I feel like something has to be said about the changes to the 4Runner. Everything that got tacked on to the 4Runner was not tacked down very well because they were so afraid to change the original design that was so good that all the changes were almost like bolt-ons. They did not really significantly change things to make other additions work. Case in point, when the TRD Pro model came out, it came with this front end. I mean, this is Such a nice front end. I wish this is actually an option available in all of them, because there is nothing that screams old school Toyota than big Toyota name lettering, not the logo in the front. But even this, when it was done, it was actually not a complete do-over of the whole front end. They were actually bolt-ons, because if you look closely, it is exactly the same grille, just one piece or two that are different. This is the level of Toyota's commitment to the 4Runner. They just do not want to change it. This is possibly one of the only visual changes on the outside since the facelift, which was a full-on facelift, 2014. And this was the other one. They added the 360 camera, and because of the 360 camera, they had to move the radar sensor down, and because of this as well, that's about it. Nothing else have changed. We still have the fake hood scoop, which some people dislike, but it does give it a little bit of character. And that's it. Nothing have changed from 2014 to 2023. Everything around this truck is exactly the same. So if you're wondering which one to buy, they're all exactly the same, other than these little things. And even the bad things did not change. For example, 2023, folks, we have no locking fuel door. So many people seriously dislike this. I mean, it would have been so much easier if Toyota would just say, oh, people don't like this non-locking, then anybody can pour whatever they want in your fuel tank. We could develop a locking cap. It's been used in the past, beautiful, possibly matches the old school character of this truck. But even this, nope. We give you the best, even with its flaws, and we will not change a single thing. The only other change, perhaps, which is more on the accessory side, but still, is this, depends who you ask. If you ask me, this hideous rack that now became an option on some, and with the 4 TRD Pro became a thing, but that's about it. Really, nothing else have changed in the 4Runner since basically the mid-year refresh in 2014 till 2023. Nothing have changed on the outside otherwise. And then we look inside the 4Runner, the place where you will live, the place where you will be at all the time when you're driving your 4Runner. Since 2010, there has been not much updates. I guess we have said that enough in this video. The only changes that happen in the 4Runner is the radio and the gauges. Everything else is exactly the same. Folks, I'm not talking about the visuals, things you touch and see behind the scenes. The wiring is exactly the same. The seat construction is exactly the same. The materials used is exactly the same. The way this thing is built is exactly the same. You see where this is going? This is why the 4Runner is what it is, because they only changed very little things, and the rest, they only improved it. And this is why we arrive at this. I mean, if you look at the interior, let's look at this interior shot here. It is not exactly what you call luxurious, but it is extremely functional. I mean, we start from the material of the dash. This is hard plastic. Nothing really, no leather, but that's intentional, because this type of plastic is a really good one. Doesn't crack very easy. It is easy to clean. Doesn't really stain or crack or do all this stuff that typical interiors do when they age. That's why they used it. Then we look at the center stack. I mean, apart from the radio changes, which they have been actually minor, if you really think about it, they just tried to keep it slightly updated. And in some generations, it almost looks like an aftermarket radio, because they just made it fit. In the later models, like this one, the radio fits a little bit better. Otherwise, they have changed not a thing. One story I will tell you about the HVAC. It is such an old school system that communication with it via a scan tool is very minimal. there is not much. You look at the modern HVAC systems, they have so much data and so much information, so much diagnostics that you can do with a scan tool or whatnot. This one is extremely basic. That's why diagnosing the one or two very rare problems with the HVAC system are very difficult, because technicians have to take themselves back to 2010 or even older than that to really remember how this system works, because it's nothing like anything modern. And again, that is a good thing, because these do not have many problems with HVAC. Then we look past the obvious. Effectively, there has been only one real change to the 4Runner since its inception, the 5th generation, 2010 to 2023. Only one major change to the electronic system that has to do with the interior, the key. Did you know that in 2022, the 4Runner has such an old school key system, the smart key part, not the non-smart key, the Toyota actually had to change it. And you can imagine that they were not happy about it. When you see this style key, this is the new key. This is a key you're going to find in the newer cars. And the 2021 4Runner was the last one to have the old style smart key, a style that they no longer make. Nobody no longer uses. They're done. So they had to change the 4Runner over. They had to bring the dinosaur to the modern age in order to keep going, because otherwise they wouldn't be able to make a smart key for it, because that system was obsolete. That's how things are with the 4Runner. They will only change things when they become absolutely obsolete, when nobody makes them. And the key is one of those. Otherwise, nothing. And people that buy the 4Runner, they know that. They know that I don't care about the latest gizmos and the latest and the greatest and the giant screen on the gauges. They don't care about that. They want a truck that lasts 15 years and drive exactly the same as it drove in day one at year 15 at 300,000 miles. And this is what this is. As simple as that. They made it so well that it lasts this long. And this interior, even though the materials are not flashy and in your face, but they're actually durable materials. For example, the headliner. The headliner material is not the same as any other Toyota from today, from 2023. This material, easy to clean, durable, does not really fade or come apart like some of the newer ones. It almost feels like when the car is new, it's going to fall apart. But there are also bad things about the interior that, despite people's calls and questions, why did you do this way? They still wouldn't change. For example, on this side, we have a grab handle. You know, the 4Runner is a higher truck, not like, say, a Highlander. When you get in it, this is very helpful to grab a hold of it and get in. Well, on the driver's side, you don't have that, only on the passenger. People have voiced concern about this, and the previous generation did have that. People have voiced concern about this. Toyota's response, we're not changing a thing. They did not change it. Nothing. And the best part is, when you go behind the scenes, this is such an overcomplicated pillar to accommodate this handle. Because remember, there is an airbag here. See, cars with handles did not have airbags here. Now we have a side curtain airbag. This is such an overcomplicated part that they really have to go over the top to design this with the handle. And this is potentially the last car ever exists that has a bolt holding the pillar covers, because most cars went to a clip that pops so the airbag would come out. But here you have a super over-engineered part just so you can bolt this on. Behind these little covers, there's actually a bolt that holds that pillar on, and on this side the bolts are behind the handle, behind two little covers. And then little convenience features. See, there are potentially 3 real configurations of the 4Runner. There is part-time 4-wheel drive and all-time 4-wheel drive. All-time 4-wheel drive is going to be your limited trims, the nicer ones, the mall crawlers, for people that don't want an off-road ready truck. They just want the 4Runner, drive it around town, and that's it. Still very capable, but that's what it's designed for. Then there is the soft 4Runner, which is part-time four-wheel drive, but has an electronic transfer case. You just flip a switch, it's a four-wheel drive, flip it again, it's in low range. Then there is the serious 4Runner, my favorite, the one with the manual transfer case. It is a sight to be behold, because there are very few trucks out there with a manual transfer case left in this world, and the 4Runner in 2023 is one of them. Let's talk about some things that are actually not good about the 4Runner and some common problems that remain. And this has to do with this old schoolness. The first thing is, this is an off-roading truck. And many people love to modify these. But I gotta tell you one thing about these. One of its Achilles heels. See, the 4Runner is typically identified as a Jeep Wrangler specifically, that doesn't break down. And that would be very accurate. It is an off-roading truck that doesn't break down. But there is one Achilles heel, that is the front differential. See, the front differential on the 4Runner is not a solid axle. It is differential with two axles, as you've seen when we talked about them. This front axle is very sensitive to lifting. It's almost like when they designed this truck, they did not think too much about modifications. When you lift this truck, you change the angle of the axles, and that puts severe wear on the needle bearings. And many folks that off-road 4Runners that lift them, they know about that. And you might have heard about failures in the front differential when you lift it. See, this is one of their Achilles heels. Before you go modifying this 4Runner that is otherwise super reliable, know that you're going to have problems with the front differential that remain. Nothing changed. It'll still fail. You're still going to have problems with it. That is just the way it is. So before you go lifting your 4Runner, I'll make one small recommendation. Here's my 2 cents here. Majority of 4Runners, with the exception of the TRD Pro, comes with regular passenger tires. Before you go lifting your truck and ruining the ride and potentially damaging the front differential, change the tires to more aggressive tires and go try it off-road. That might be all you need before you go lifting and destroying this otherwise super reliable truck. The other thing is, and this is something beyond me, why they wouldn't change that and do something about it, the park neutral safety switch. Many people have this problem and they don't know about it until it becomes a real problem. See, you put your truck in neutral or park, the indicator does not show it. That's the first sign that you're going to have a bad park neutral safety switch. Eventually, it becomes a check engine light and a park neutral safety switch. This is such an old problem with the 4Runner, and it remains a problem. It's just, they just don't want to update it. I don't know why. If you live in the Rust Belt, it becomes an issue because it gets seized. That is something very common. Otherwise, it's actually a very simple repair and inexpensive. The other thing is, the front wheel bearings remain an issue with these. And it's not really an issue that's going to happen at 50,000 miles, not even 100, 150 and plus, perhaps. But the way it happens, you're driving, there's no noise, you go do an inspection on your truck, the wheel is loose. That is why I warn about the front wheel bearings on these. You gotta check them regularly, especially when you start getting in the higher miles. It is normal for 4Runners to have well over 200,000 miles and run perfectly fine, just like the day they were new. So check the front wheel bearings, because this is still a common problem. And possibly the biggest problem, and it has to do with this truck's old schoolness, the frame, rust. Folks, these, if you don't live in the Rust Belt, things are great. You'll never have issues. But as salt hits these frames, and as time passes, you're going to have a lot of issues with rust, to a point where they become almost detrimental to the safety of the truck. The recommendation is, if you live in the Rust Belt, and where I am from, like Chicago area, you want to undercoat these. Still, even if you buy a 2023 model, you still need to undercoat it to protect it. That's the only thing you need to do, and this truck will last a very, very long time without issues. And one more thing, and in fairness, it is not the 4Runner's fault. It is you, the owners. Don't forget to activate your four-wheel drive every month or so. Something about the 4Runner's old schoolness is the four-wheel drive system. Yes, it is computer controlled, but it is a lot more like this computer controlling it, not this one. Very ancient. I mean, this is such an ancient four-wheel drive system. That's why it's so rugged and reliable, because there's not much going on here. When these are not used, let's say 3 years pass, you never used four-wheel drive, then all of a sudden you use it, it gets stuck in a state that it's not in four-wheel drive, it's half in four-wheel drive, and just things go into limbo and we don't know what's going on. Very difficult to diagnose when they do get in that state, because again, this is a computer that is super old school and just not the kind of computer you just communicate with and life is good. It is difficult to diagnose, so make sure every month, switch it to four-wheel drive, drive a mile or so, switch it back and forth between low. You don't need to drive it on low, just switch it into low gear and then back it out. That's good enough to move the actuators, get everything moving, and you wouldn't have issues with it when you do need it. Let's talk about what is actually the best trim of the 4Runner to consider. Today we have the TRD Pro here in the shop, and this is the Halo model. But I'll share something with you before we get into the trims. I don't like this. This might come to a surprise to some. I think the better trim is the TRD Off-Road Premium. This is God honest truth, folks. If you want to know the trim for the 4Runner before we get into them, look here. They will always have a badge here. What trim do you have? Except the premium, like if you go TRD Off-Road, TRD Off-Road Premium, they're not going to say premium, but they'll say TRD Off-Road. Let's start with the trims. The SR5 is probably the best trim to start with a 4Runner, unless you want options. Because with the SR5, you're going to get the lowest price, least options, no smart key, no fancy leather, well, it's not really fancy at all, by the way, but smaller screen, whatnot, but you're going to get everything else. It almost makes it like a deal of the century, because between the top of the line model, like TRD Pro, except the suspension and the wheels and the tires, everything else is exactly the same. So usually when you go on the lower trims, you have a smaller engine, you're missing a lot, but in the 4Runner, that's not the case. The only thing you're missing is the manual transfer case. That's about it. And by the way, for those who wonder, I am yet to see issues with the button transfer case. They don't really have issues either, folks, so don't be afraid of them. Then we go from that to the TRD Off-Road, which, in my opinion, the best one, because then you do get the manual transfer case, which, not just for reliability's sake, for character's sake, it is just epic. Honestly, if you're debating between a TRD Pro and a TRD Off-Road Premium, go with the TRD Off-Road Premium. It'll ride nicer, it'll be better. Yes, the wheels and the tires, but you can always buy those. And the suspension, if you're not going to really off-road with this, it makes absolutely no sense. And if you're thinking of modifying this, putting different suspension, raising it even higher, why buy the TRD Pro? You're just going to spend more and possibly deal with the dealership markup, because these are very rare to find, and then take that off and put your stuff. Makes absolutely no sense. I don't see that. Then we go into the Limited. If you are the kind of person that are buying the 4Runner only for its reliability and ruggedness and just old school, no nonsense transportation, get the Limited, perhaps, if you want a nicer place to be. It'll have slightly nicer interior. The look will be less utilitarian and rugged. It'll be more city-like. That's really the only thing. And you don't have to deal with, wait, we're in the snow, do we switch to two-wheel drive, four-wheel drive? It's always in four-wheel drive, because it's full-time four-wheel drive. That's what it's designed for. All the other little trims here and there make absolutely no sense to me. Folks, that's the God-honest truth. If you want the cheapest 4Runner that is very good, go with the SR5. If you want the city cruiser 4Runner, go with the Limited. If you want the absolute epic 4Runner experience, TRD Off-Road. If you want to go with the TRD Pro, there's nothing wrong with it, but just know you're going to overpay and not really get much difference than the TRD Off-Road in the real world. So the most important question, and the question you potentially click this video to find the answer for: should you buy a 2023 Toyota 4Runner, or for that matter, a 5th generation 4Runner, or should you wait for the 6th generation? See, I say the 6th generation is very close, not because some rumors has it. I don't deal with that stuff. I'm just a mechanic. I work on cars, and I look at logic more than tabloids and newspapers and whatever. The Tundra got changed. The Sequoia got changed. These are the two dinosaurs that Toyota had. And then on the Lexus side, the Land Cruiser or the LX got changed. The GX remains. So is the 4Runner. Folks, it is very important that you know the relation between the GX, which is a Prado internationally, and the 4Runner. They're built on the same platform. They are very similar. There is a lot of parts sharing between the 4Runner and the GX and the Prado because they're built in the same factory on the same line. Here is my theory of who should get this 4Runner and who should wait for the new one. This 4Runner is not meant for those that will want the latest gizmos and the last technology and all the coolest things. This is not a truck for those that keep a car for 3 to 5 years and then get bored of it and move on to something else. This is not a car for those that want to haul their family and just use it in that regard. This is a truck for someone that wants to keep this thing for 10 to 15 years plus, doesn't mind the old schoolness, actually appreciates it. Appreciates the fact that here is an old school engine, gets horrible gas mileage, but it is so rugged and well made that it'll outlast anything sold today. And you look at the drivetrain, the way it's built, the way it behaves, this transmission, as we said, it's like a no transmission. You don't need 8 and 9 and 10 and 17 million gears. You just need 5. It works great. Why change it? You don't need all these electric power steering and all these complications and safety systems and all. You don't need all that. I just need 4 wheels and an engine to move them. This is exactly what this is. And it's so well made and has such huge character. Initially, when you drive the 4Runner, you'll be like, what's so special about this? Give it a week of driving, and you will answer that question yourself. If you want an off-roading truck, but you also want the latest gizmos and the features and the high-tech stuff, perhaps wait for the 6th generation, because this will disappoint you. But if you want the old schoolness, because that's what makes this very cool. One last thing I will say about the 4Runner before we wrap up this video. Did you know, and this is something perhaps you've never thought about, did you know that the 4Runner, the 5th generation, initially, when it came out, was a failure? And Toyota almost canceled this model altogether. But then people noticed what is so special about this truck, and they started buying it left and right, and then it remained. Initially, it was not selling well. People looked at this, it's like, why would I buy this and not buy a Highlander that's much nicer, smoother, has newer technology? Why would I do that? But then people later realized, because this is a keeper. This is a truck you keep for a very long time. No nonsense, no compromise, old school. That's what this is. Not for everybody, but if you are that somebody that this appeals to, look no further. You will not be disappointed. Folks, I hope this video was helpful, informative. I hope you learned something new. If you like it, consider giving it a thumbs up. If you're not a subscriber, consider subscribing to the channel. Check out some of my other videos. And until the next video, folks, may the Lord bless you and keep you, and you have yourself a wonderful day.